Welcome. I'm Sebastian Mahfood, and you're listening to WCAT Radio, the on-air wing of En Route Books and Media, bringing you the dulcet sounds of Catholic wisdom, as we welcome today The Lost Voice with John Studi and Jacob Nelson.
Welcome to The Lost Voice Radio, where we seek to uncover the lost voice of Socrates, which first spoke 2,000 years ago. I'm John Studi.
2,500 years ago.
Hey, I'm approximating. This is John Studi in either case, along with Jacob Nelson, and we're here to try to bring to light some of the uncovered treasures of classical philosophy and theology and bring them into the service of our daily life. How are you doing, Jacob?
I am good. I'm drinking coffee, just kind of relaxing. Got a stormy Tuesday today in good old Minnesota. Love spring storms with thunder and lightning. By the way, we're struggling to name our son,
yes,
who's still swimming. He's not on the ground yet. And I thought, boy, he's moving a lot. Sarah's like, we should name him Flash. I'm like,
Flash?
We should name him Lightning. And then I can be Thunder. Because I have a deep, booming voice. It'd be great.
I thought it was your thunder thighs.
I do not have thunder thighs, thank you.
Sure, Mr. 6'2" and 175 pounds over there.
Yeah. Lean, mean, fighting machine right here.
Well, lean is a word for it, I guess. That's very
good.
Yeah. Wiry is what they called me when I was younger. Actually, I was playing when I was playing football. My first offensive motion, in my first game.
Wow, to go back to your first offensive motion. You've had a lot of offensive.
I've had a lot of offensive motions. Almost every time I open my mouth is an offensive motion.
That's true.
Anyway, so I was halfback, and we ran just a handoff. I went through the line and started running, and I don't remember who it was, but a friend of mine was in the stands, and one of their moms stands up and says, "Wow, look at that running toothpick. He sure can fly." Which was the case. I was very, very thin when I was younger. It was terrible. But I don't know what to call your son.
I don't know either.
I don't have a name for him. Maybe we could have a naming contest from the listeners where we can give away some sort of prize for the best name, like naming your son.
That'd be cool.
That name.
Email us at lostvoice. Was it lostvoice at wcatradio.com. Yeah, lostvoice at wcatradio.com.
You know exactly where we are. But me, on the other hand, here's what's going on in my life, Jake. I do not like the spring rain.
Why not?
I like the thunder and the lightning.
I love spring rain.
I don't know what it is, but whenever it rains, my brain just shuts off. I get tired. I get a little bit down.
How is this different from when it's sunny?
Because I have an excuse.
Oh, okay.
Yes.
Gotcha.
That's the difference, Jake. And now, here's the other thing that's been going on. I've been totally wiped recently because my wife and I finally decided to have my son wean off his pacifier at night.
Oh, boy.
He's almost 2 years old. So he's been going without it at nap time at daycare.
I still like my Nooks.
I know. Yeah. I'm the same. But Michael's, he's just way ahead of most people.
Yeah, that's true.
But we took him off his Nook last Friday, and since then he's been waking up about an hour earlier. And so he's getting up at like 5:15, 5:30. And I'm go to bed at midnight, fall asleep at 1 o'clock because I'm reading. My brain's all wired until about 2 o'clock in the morning unless I'm sleeping. And then he gets up that early. Oh,
that's rough. I'm the kind of guy, I'm ready for bed about 9 o'clock.
Well, you're old.
I am old. I'm an old soul.
You've been old for a long time.
I am a 28-year-old with, a 70-year-old soul. Even though souls don't have age.
I mean, they kind of do.
Kind of.
Because your soul comes into existence when you do.
Right.
And so it exists in time.
Yes, but they're...
Now we're back to time.
It
all makes sense, Jake.
It's our first meeting. We have immortal souls, and so they don't die. They go on forever, right. But they do have a beginning.
They do.
So.
Although they're potentially destroyable if God were to directly destroy them, because...
Which he wouldn't.
No.
Yeah.
I mean, we don't have any reason to think so.
However, if God destroyed a soul, and thus their existence is no longer, and their existence is unknowable, would we ever know if that person was destroyed? For instance, if you were destroyed right now, would anybody be affected?
Well, not in the way that people normally think, as in they'd be sad. I don't think anybody would be affected that way.
Nobody would be sad.
Nobody would be sad.
You're so mean to yourself.
I know I am. No, my wife would be very upset. So would my son. I came home the other day.
No, but my point is, if the soul is destroyed and no longer in existence, then God doesn't even know of the existence of that soul. Therefore, would our minds even recognize that there was an existence to be that was?
Yes.
Okay.
I mean, well, you destroy other things, right? And you knew that those things once were.
Yeah.
Like that time my car exploded. You remember that?
I don't know if we were friends yet when your car exploded.
I don't know. That was ridiculous. I don't know if you listeners have ever had experiences with cars like mine, but every single one of my cars went out with a bang. And the
literally?
last one was like literally a bang. It exploded on Highway 100. It was terrible. And it was like 106 degrees that day, too. It was disgusting and humid, and I had to walk like 3.5 miles.
Didn't your connecting rod go through the crankcase?
Something like that, and there was all I knew is I heard a loud bang, a lot of grinding. My car came to a sudden stop. There was oil and smoke everywhere. And I decided, odds are, I shouldn't be in this car. Sounds like a bad idea, so I got out of it.
Yeah, that's a good call.
My last car, great car, it was a 1990 Geo Prism.
Oh, Jesus.
Not a pretty car, but you know what? For its time,
got the job done.
You got the job done. It was free. Had good gas mileage. It handled like a charm, whatever that means. And I was on Highway 96 going to school, and when I was going over the bridge that goes over 35W, I heard a loud clunk. My car came to a sudden stop, and I couldn't put it in reverse. Couldn't put it in neutral. Nothing, because not only had the transmission broken. I don't know exactly what it was, but the brakes had all decided to lock up at the same time.
Oh.
Which I don't understand how that happened. It was ridiculous. And the hard part about it was that I was, number one, going like 50 miles per hour, and went from 50 to 0 in about 3 seconds. Less than that, like half a second. And I was in the middle of a lane change. And so I was stuck in between 2 lanes and right in front of the on-ramp 35W. So I was in a very inconvenient spot, and people were trying to push me out with their trucks and push the car, and it just wasn't working. They were getting mad at me for not putting in neutral, and I was like, come here, look, yes, I'm 17 years old, but I'm not dumb as a rock. That's insulting to rocks. Please don't demean those. Don't demean those things. Anyway, got a tow 2 hours later. I can tell more stories about my abysmal car record, but...
And I can't. My dad was a mechanic for many, many years, so I actually learned how to fix things. Works well. Save money. Wonderful. Anyway, we should probably talk about our, something of, note or importance or...
Hey, my car record and my baby not having a nook anymore is important.
True, and wild tangents are probably part of the reason why our listeners listen to us. So, it's all good. But instead of doing a tangent the entire time, we should maybe talk about a few things of importance and then go on tangents throughout the episode here. Episode program. I don't know what you call this thing. Train wreck.
Well,
dumpster fire.
Speaking of transportational devices and train wrecks.
Where are you going with this?
Let's talk about snakes on a plane.
Okay.
It reminds me of a bad spin-off that could be Catholic. WCAT Radio, which is a subsidiary of Enroute Books and Media. The media portion, we can make a movie called Popes on a Plane. Yes. Popes on a Plane. Papal statements.
By the way, I just want to make a point here. That was an excellent segue. And normally you don't talk about segues and that kind of stuff on radio because you want them to be seamless, but this is worth putting a seam in the seamlessness of it because that was excellent. Anyway, Popes on a Plane.
And it wasn't entirely contrived whatsoever because it was natural. We had this brilliant idea, and now we're going to be naturally and fluidly transitioning into talking about Pope Francis's recent statement about Medjugorje.
Yeah, it's interesting because the bishop of in Medjugorje has been very skeptical of the apparitions in Medjugorje for some time now. Pope Benedict had issued an investigation into Medjugorje to see if it was a legitimate apparition of Our Lady a number of years ago, and the bishop of the area has said on more than one occasion that obviously, if we're praying to Mary, all this stuff, it's good. But we can't believe, even privately right now, that Medjugorje is an actual apparition of our Blessed Mother. And so there's been doubt coming from the hierarchy in Medjugorje for some time already. Now, John, you're talking about something Pope Francis had said on his plane ride back from Fatima, I believe.
Right. And it just seemed very appropriate, him leaving Fatima, that one of the news reporters, one of the anchors, had asked him about another Marian apparition that's been a subject of some controversy as of late, which is Our Lady of Medjugorje, which is an apparition that started just about 20 years ago, if I'm remembering correctly. I think it was about 1980, and then
81 is when
it was 81. Yeah. Okay, and there were a number of investigations, commissions that were promulgated by the bishops in Croatia from 1982 to 1984. Another one from 1984 to 1986.
By the way, it hasn't always been the bishops of Croatia because that area of the world has changed boundaries.
That's true.
Over the last 40 years, or 30 years, so 36 years. Just so we understand that it's not always the bishops of Croatia,
right.
Sometimes bishops of other areas
that
oversee it.
But
yeah, I just want to be clear and fair to our hierarchy.
Thanks, Jake.
No problem.
That's what you're here for.
That's right.
Keep wrenches in my carefully.
Keep you in line. We all know you want to subvert the hierarchy somehow.
Hey.
Or C.S. Lewis calls it the lowerarchy in terms of the demonic influence. Are you part of the hierarchy or the lowerarchy, Studi?
I can neither confirm nor deny any of these allegations. I'm a part of the mutualarchy. I don't know what that would be.
The mediarchy?
The mediarchy. That would aptly describe all of my characteristics, actually, mediarchy or mediocracy.
Yeah.
That's the kind of government that I would enact if I were ever elected as a...
So in the mediarchy, everybody's actually the same.
Yes. It's perfect communism.
Perfect. All right.
Perfect liberal America.
Anyway, mediocrity.
So there was another study conducted by the bishops in that region of the world that's concluded in 1990, and the Congregation for the Doctrine of the Faith also studied the phenomena in 2010, 2014, and then in 2016 again. And all of them came across saying, yeah, we're not entirely so sure. In fact, Bishop Ratko Perry, who is the bishop that was directly overseeing the Fatima apparitions, he did not have a whole lot of good things to say about it. He said that she laughs in a strange way, and then when people ask her certain questions, she disappears and returns. She always obeyed the seers and the pastors who were supposed to be speaking for her and giving her instructions. And so there was just a lot of very strange things that were going on that he just did not really seem to think aligned with what would qualify as a genuine Marian apparition. And so it does seem to be a very strange thing. And the bishop even said that this is not the Madonna of the Gospels. He was very, very cleure about it. And Pope Francis said something similar.
Yeah, the Pope on the plane said something similar.
Right, exactly. They also were touching her body and her veil, and all in all, it just seemed to be a very unusual situation. And Pope Francis said something similar. He said that the Vatican reports and Pope Benedict said, we have our doubts about the authenticity of these apparitions. But Pope Francis said, and I quote, and I love Pope Francis's rhetoric on some of these things, he said, I personally am a bit more nasty. I prefer Madonna as mother, our mother, and not as a woman who's the head of a telegraph office, who every day sends a message at such and such hour. This is not the mother of Jesus. And these presumed apparitions don't have a lot of value. This I say as a personal opinion.
So that's necessarily then the official teaching of the Church.
Absolutely, because we talk about Pope Peter the First. Obviously, I don't know if there's another Pope Peter actually.
There is not.
I didn't think there was. Who would name themselves Peter? That would seem almost, I don't know.
Well, I don't know.
Very arrogant. But in any case,
I want another Cornelius. That's a great name.
That is a good name. I like Cornelius.
Sixtus?
I was just thinking Sixtus.
Oh, okay. So when your son Michael becomes Pope, he can be Sixtus.
He can be Pope Sixtus. I wouldn't mind if he was Pope Ignatius. Ignatius is a cool name.
What if it was the sixth Sixtus, so it'd be the 60th?
The Sixtus.
Anyway.
Anywho.
It's not official church teaching.
It's not.
The Pope's opinion.
Which almost, most of what the Pope says is simply his opinion. It's very rare that the Pope will say something that has much bearing on church teaching. Granted, when the Pope says something, we should give it a certain level of honor and respect because of his office. But unless he's speaking ex cathedra, or if he's issuing an encyclical or another official papal teaching, then really I think that we need to be careful about taking his word as too authoritative, and that he is really just speaking as a private theologian or individual, like he is on this plane. And there have been a number of times where people have jumped on something the Pope has said and taking it to mean some new teaching, like, who am I to judge?
That's the comment that just keeps on giving, isn't it?
It is a comment that keeps on giving, but I wish people would actually understand the comment in the first place, because he wasn't talking about whether or not there's gay people out there who want to get married, and he said, who am I to judge? What he was talking about is that if there's somebody with homosexual attraction who strives for holiness and loves the Lord, and then in that case, who am I to judge? And he's 100% correct.
Right.
Who is he to judge? If that person is doing everything they can to live a virtuous and holy life, then he cannot judge their soul. He can judge their actions.
Yeah, we can never judge the state of a soul.
Yeah.
We can, get to understand to some degree the culpability of somebody. My wife and I were just watching a Father Brown episode on Netflix. Netflix is airing the BBC version of Father Brown, which are a series of novels that G.K. Chesterton wrote about a sleuthing Catholic priest in England. And in one episode, there's a flashback to World War II, and this guy, serviceman, shoots one of his brothers in arms in the battlefield because he was dying. And so he shot him to put him out of his misery because there was no hope of saving his life at all. And then we talked about the morality of that, and of course it's not moral to euthanize somebody. But their culpability, this man's culpability, is greatly lessened because of the fatigue of war, the insanity going on around, and the mental duress of seeing somebody who's closer to you than even your blood brothers and sisters, because your life is dependent on this other person constantly. And so the mental duress that somebody's under severely limits the culpability of the action. Now, of course, it's still wrong. But you can't take away the fact that shooting somebody to euthanize them is wrong. But the culpability that, how much are we guilty can be a greater or lesser degree. Right,
and I think that's something that people get caught up on too, is that if there's a degree of culpability, or if a mortally sinful action, a grave action, can be downgraded for a certain person to be a venial sin due to their culpability, people tend to jump all over that, thinking that, well, then we should probably just assume that all grave sins are probably venial, or grave actions are all probably venial sins.
Yeah.
Or that we shouldn't be able to speak moral proclamations. In fact, I have a student in my youth ministry program who has taken advantage to some extent of the church's teaching on culpability, where what you see this all the time. Heck, I'll do this from time to time as well, where I think to myself, well, maybe I wouldn't really know. For instance, the other day, now everything's good here, okay? Went to Walmart, bought a bunch of stuff, was kind of in a hurry, and something got left in the cart. And it was a $15 tub of Vaseline for my son. I went outside, got everything in the car, realized it was right there. I had to get home really soon. And so I thought to myself, I just got to get home. I'll come back tomorrow when I've got a little more time, and then I'll pay for it. And then my second thought was, you'll forget about it. Well, then I said, well, if I forget about it, then I'm not really guilty of it anyway. And I'm like, wait, hold on a second.
That's not how that works.
And so I'm like, let's go back inside. And so I turned it. I tried it joyfully because I knew that this was something that's the good thing to do.
Right.
And ultimately, I shouldn't even have the thought of, I'll come back tomorrow, because in either case, I'm walking out with a product that I didn't pay for.
Yeah.
And so my first thought should have been go in and take care of it right away. But still, you see that process right there where I know the church is teaching on moral culpability, and I'm using it as an excuse.
Yeah. See, the more we know, the more we're able to love, but also the more we're able to subvert teaching.
Loopholes.
Loopholes.
That's what life's about, loopholes.
Anyway, back to the infallibility piece. Infallible teaching can happen in two ways. Either the Roman pontiff, the Pope, using his full authority, or the Pope with all of the bishops together. The key, I think, here is to focus on the infallibility of the Pope himself.
Right.
Because perhaps in a democratic society as we are in, it's easier to see where if all of the bishops of the world are in union with the Pope, that obviously there's something infallible there, because when can we get all of our senators and representatives to agree on something? It would take a miracle, right?
Basically.
And you know what? Sadly, those in the church, those in the hierarchy, it would take as much of a miracle to get them to all agree on something at this point.
Which has happened before, actually. The first ecumenical council outside of the Council of Jerusalem, the council, which I'm talking about the Council of Nicaea, at the time, the whole world was Arian.
Yeah.
Except the laity, a lot of the laity were still of the Orthodox faithful, but many of the bishops had actually fallen astray, or fallen away from the faith. But when the Council of Nicaea was called, I think they had like 318 bishops there, and 316 voted for Nicene Orthodoxy, that the Fathers and Sons are consubstantial, whereas only 2 of the people who were present voted for the Arian heresy, which of course were Arius and his biographer. So it tells you something right there. Some people were listening to the Holy Spirit, others were not. So there was a miracle at the very first council.
Yeah, and that's not to say that we agree on doctrine simply by way of voting, because the church is not democratic. But that's where this idea of the infallibility of the Roman pontiff comes into play, because if every bishop of the world voted yes on some issue, and the Pope said no, it would not be infallible. It would not be a church teaching, because there has to be unity with the head.
Which in some ways is what was happening in the 60s with Humana Vitae.
Oh, we can get there in a minute.
Okay.
Now I have things to say about that.
Of course, yes, you do.
The infallibility of the Roman pontiff, there needs to be 3 conditions fulfilled. So if you're out there listening and you have a pen and piece of paper, or taking notes to this, just the glorious wisdom John Studi has to offer the world, or the mediocrity that I have to, I don't know, whatever. The 3 conditions that you might want to take note of here: when the Pope speaks not as a private doctor, but as universal pastor and doctor of all Christians. So he has to be intending to speak as Pope and to all Christians. Number 2, when he defines something to be held or believed definitively by the universal church. That word definitively is key here. It's not something that, I suppose the church could believe that, or I'm open to talking about deaconesses. That is not something definitive.
Or he didn't say talking about it, he said I'm open to researching it.
Yeah, I'm open to researching it. That is not something that is definitive. And then third, in matters of faith and morals. And so he has to be intending to speak to the entire Christian world as the universal pastor. It has to be something definitive that he's defining, and it has to be on something of faith and morals.
Right.
And so these 3 things must be fulfilled. If one of them is not fulfilled, it is not an infallible teaching. So the Pope to say, well, myself as my own private thought or my own personal opinion, that is not the Pope speaking as universal pastor. He's speaking as a private doctor. Therefore, what he said about Medjugorje is not church teaching.
Yep, absolutely. No, not to get too meta here, but even that is a part of an infallible definition for dogma. Because in the First Vatican Council, which one of the primary questions of the First Vatican Council was actually on papal
infallibility.
Papal infallibility. In order to make a doctrine a dogma, it has to have clear set limitations, which is what a definition gives. Kind of like the dogma of the Immaculate Conception, that Mary, from the very moment of her conception, was free from the stain of original sin and was infused with God's grace.
Right.
And so it gives a very specific definition within which theologians and the faithful can work and think about their faith. And so this is the same way it works with papal infallibility. This is the same thing that happens with anything else that might be dogmatically declared by the Pope.
Right.
One that is infallible, I'm not sure if it's dogmatic per se, but was Pope John Paul II's 2004, I think it was not an encyclical letter, apostolic letter, or no, it was a declaration. What's it called?
Evangelium Vitae?
No, not Evangelium Vitae. Why is this became me? It was on women's ordination.
Oh.
I always know it off the top of my
yeah.
head every single time. That's fine.
Yeah.
In the other case, Jake will look it up for me. I don't know why I'm forgetting this. Again, it's the rain and my son waking up at 5 in the morning.
Ordinatio Sacerdotales.
Yeah, Sacerdotales. Okay. All right, so Ordinatio Sacerdotales, it's chapter 4. The Pope definitively says that the Church does not have the authority to ordain women to the priesthood. Just very flat out says it. And there was some controversy about whether or not this was something that should be considered authoritative or as dogmatic. And the wording of it is very interesting. Pope John Paul II, very often when he writes, if he speaks in the first person, it's often the first person singular. But here he says "we," which is the royal "we," which is invocative of him speaking from the chair of Peter, because the chair of Peter is actually that of a royal office. If you go back to Matthew 16, 18 through 19. Where Jesus gives Peter the keys of the kingdom, which is absolutely essential to understand that passage. The keys of the kingdom refer back to the kingdom of David, and in the kingdom of David there was a man who was named the minister of the house, who was given a set of keys which represented him having the authority of the king to make law, to open the city up for trade, and to run the city in the king's absence. This is how David was able to sleep in past noon to watch Bathsheba bathe on the roof. How could the king sleep in, not do any administrative duties all day? Well, because they had a minister of the house who could run the show for him. And so when the Pope invokes this royal "we," he is not only speaking as himself, as a particular doctor, but he's speaking as a universal doctor. And so there's some ways that we can recognize when the Pope is speaking in a way that should be considered declarative or definitive. But it's not when he's getting up on a plane and talking about Marian Apparitions, or when he's talking about how you don't have to have 18 children to be a good Catholic, which is another thing that people hopped all over a few years ago. Drove me nuts. I remember getting a big argument with a lady, and she said that, Pope Francis is now saying that we only need to have 1 or 2 children. How did you get that from his statement? What he was talking about was that there are people who think that if you don't have 7 or 8 children, you're not a good Catholic, which is not the case. I know families, great Catholic families, who only have 2 kids. Why? Either because they couldn't financially support them in another material way, or they had infertility issues. Just because you don't have a lot of kids doesn't mean you're not a good Catholic.
Just so, in case any of you go and read that document of Ordinatio Sacerdotales, in Article 4, if you're reading in the English, it actually says "I declare."
Oh, I thought it was "we," I'm sorry.
But if you look at the Latin, it uses the word "nostri," which is the same root word that we use in the Pater Noster, or Our Father. And so there is this sense of universality there, or brotherhood, or however you want to call that. But you're right there, but even more clear in that sentence he says, or the whole paragraph there. He says, "Wherefore, in order that all doubt may be removed regarding a matter of great importance, a matter which pertains to the Church's divine constitution itself, in virtue of my ministry of confirming the brethren, I, or in the Latin, we, or our declaration, is that Church has no authority whatsoever to confer priestly ordination on women, and that this judgment is to be definitively held by all the Church's faithful." So he is saying that it is a definitive teaching. It is not one that is simply a matter of opinion or open to debate. It is something definitive, and thus it is infallible. There ought to be no question on that in any manner.
Now, we could talk about women's ordination another day. In fact, I'd love to. I have a crazy theory.
I know that theory.
I know you.
We should talk about that maybe next week.
Yeah, we can talk about that next week. So I need to write on it too.
I don't think it's a crazy theory. I think it's actually a pretty good theory.
I think so too. I want to put it together and research it a little bit more. In fact, I talked to a couple of theologians. A lady who I forget her name now, but she wrote a book, Women's Ordination. And she seemed to give it a little nod, so that's not too bad. Anyway, so we can talk about that next week. Basically, what I found was a possible argument for showing the necessity from Scripture and from church teaching, from church tradition, that it's only possible for men, or it's only appropriate for men to be ordained to ministry.
Well, I would say possible,
because
it's according to the nature. You said possible or appropriate.
I should say fitting. It's fitting and only possible because of the divine economy.
It's interesting because we get caught up today, especially I think with talking about the differences between men and women and the equality of men and women and all this stuff. Well, first of all, the idea of equality should be one of proportion, not mathematics. So there's a difference between having an equal 8 ounces of water. Right?
Sure.
There's mathematically the exact same amount of water.
Sure.
But what about equality of a cup being full? What if your cup is 4 ounces and mine is 12 ounces? Both are full and thus equal, but by way of proportion, not strict mathematics. So when we talk about equality, it should be one of proportion, talking about men and women, because the reality is I can never give birth. I don't know how I would try, but even if I tried, I could never give birth. And so there is a different, I would say, kind of dignity in terms of men and women, because men can never bring life into the world. We just can't. We have a part to play in it, but the reality is it's the woman who grows the child, feeds the child, all of that stuff. That doesn't mean that man's dignity is less than woman's in terms of completeness.
Yes.
But there is a particular dignity that women have that men don't.
Yes.
But we need to talk about dignity in terms of whole and completeness, and that only makes sense with a equality of proportion. Because if it was about equality of mathematics, then we need to find a scientific way to ensure that men can give birth.
Amongst other things. And
right.
Oddly enough, and I don't really want to get into this, they're actually trying.
They are.
Oh dear. Oh dear. Anyway, moving on. So, women's ordination and other issues related to that could be next week, maybe even including the feminine genius. Why did I say genus for? I don't know.
But what I was getting at goes along with that they found differences in men and women, not just in terms of the double X chromosome versus XY chromosome, but there's a study out of Israel like a week and a half ago that found something like 1,800 different genetic differences in men's cells versus women's cells. For instance, the cells that make up a woman's skin are genetically totally different than men's.
Huh.
And so it's not so easy as to simply say it's 2 X's or an X and a Y.
Sure.
It was almost 1,800 different differences in genes.
Well, that's not even considering like the psychological differences, such as.
Well, I think that was probably part of it.
Oh, was it? Okay.
Yeah.
I thought you were just talking about.
Well, how brain cells are made up are just different in men and women.
Well, there's 3 times the amount of corpus callosum between the 2 hemispheres in women than there's men.
It's because women are smarter than men.
They're smarter than men. There's more communication going on. Both sides of the brain talk to each other more often, which you can also imagine where that comes into play. Men's brain brains are slightly larger, but that's mostly because we have more muscle, and so our brains need to have more motor neurons controlling those.
So we don't flail wildly.
So we don't flail wildly like Simic does. Simic is a friend of ours.
Which leads into another segment that we're going to start doing, which is called the Theological Wheel of Destruction.
Yes, a number of years ago, we had a sit-down conversation with a friend of ours in a Perkins over in Crystal, Minnesota, and she had some doubts about the Catholic faith.
I would go further than doubt. She was adamantly
blatantly anti-Catholic, and she was mad about it too. And so we sat there for maybe 4 hours, and so Jacob, myself, and two of our other friends sat there and answered all of her questions that night. And one after the other, we'd add our little piece to the puzzle. By the end of the night, she left and she got into her car and just broke down and cried. Not because she had actually spent 4 hours or whatever it was with the four of us, which most people would cry because of that.
True.
But the reason why she cried is because she had finally seen the truth, goodness, and beauty of the Catholic Church. She learned that she had been lied to about it her entire life. And so the next day, she decided to join RCIA, which was incredible. I don't know how many times you've seen a major conversion like that in one night.
Very inspiring to me. But so the four of us who were there with this wonderful young woman, I don't know where it even came up, but somehow the name got applied to us, the Theological Wheel of Destruction. Now, a couple of points about that is that the wheel, because we kept going around and around the table, all taking our turn like spokes in a wheel. But the destruction piece, I was always kind of curious about, but it made sense more recently when you and I were talking, John, that destroying things like heresy and hatred towards the church and that kind of thing, and bringing about truth, goodness, and beauty. So anyway, John, you came up with an idea about a segment on our show, which sounds like a lot of fun.
Oh, it's going to be a blast. And so what we're going to do is we're going to assign some theological madness or philosophical madness that somebody in the Theological Wheel of Destruction is going to need to destroy, like Hume's theory of causation, that there is no real causation, just a lot of correlation that we associate with one thing or another, or Arianism, or the Jehovah's Witness teaching that Jesus is really St. Michael the Archangel.
I know the first one I'm going to take, that in the Jehovah's Witness and Mormon traditions that alcohol is evil. And I'm going to take...
shots while you're doing the...
No. No, I'm not taking shots. But destroy that idea, because I forget which theologian said it in the early church. I think it was St. John Chrysostom, said that if anybody says... that drinking alcohol is a heresy or somehow evil, you need to punch them in the face for the heresy they're committing against our Lord, which is hilarious.
Actually the case. We will find this quotation and we'll put it on the website, or Jake will read it off or something. This is fantastic. But anyway, so we'll have a countdown timer and an explosion at the end, because why not? And we're going to be putting together a little voiceover thing too. It'll be a blast. You guys are going to enjoy a brand new segment on our show, with all the common sense that's going to come out there, I suppose. It's fun. Who cares? We'll have a blast with it. All right. But Jacob, so we've been talking about a lot of stuff today, and I wanted to address a little bit more this issue of Marian Apparitions. Now, growing up as a Protestant, this was probably one of the biggest issues that I had, one of the biggest difficulties. Marian devotion and the rosary and the saints in general. And there's a number of ways that I've overcome that. Primarily, it was through the understanding of the Queen Mother's role in the Old Testament. Whereas before, my understanding as a Protestant was that Mary was just like a really cool lady. She loved God, and she was more or less just a vessel of Christ's body, and that God used her to bring Jesus on earth. And that's about as far as her role in salvation history was gonna go. But this is profoundly unbiblical, because if you look in the Old Testament, particularly in the book of 1 Kings, chapter 2, what you see there is Solomon is now ascending to the throne after his father David. And Absalom, the brother of David, the brother of Solomon, is trying to usurp Solomon. And what he does is he actually goes to Bathsheba and asks to marry this woman named Abishag, who was the last person to be in bed with David.
I believe you mean Saul, not Solomon. Solomon was David's son.
That's what I'm saying.
Yeah.
Oh, this is second. This is Kings.
Yeah.
Saul is in 1 Samuel.
Oh, gotcha.
Yeah.
Okay. Because Absalom is Saul's son.
No, it was David's son. 100% sure.
Okay, carry on.
100% sure.
Carry on. Just keep telling your story.
All right, keep telling my
fine.
story. Anyway, moving on. And so what happens is he goes to Solomon's brother goes to Bathsheba, asks her this question. Hey, can you ask Solomon on my behalf to have him let me marry Abishag? And now in the kingdom, in the ancient Near East in Israel, if you were to have sexual relationship with your father's mother, whether or not father's wife, whether or not that was your mother, is a different story.
Just for the record, we're both right.
We're both right.
Saul had a son named Absalom, and I remember this because he was killed in the pursuit of David when David was...
And I was wrong. It's Adonijah. Adonijah, my bad. It was Adonijah.
All right.
Fine, Jake. Fine. I'll get most of the story.
I'm a Catholic who knows my Bible.
That's painful. I'm a biblical scholar who got a name mixed up. Oh, no.
Yep.
Anyway, so Adonijah goes to Bathsheba, asks him all this. Can I marry Abishag, etc., etc. And Bathsheba goes to Solomon, and asks him this. You know what he does? He does exactly what the Protestant king of Israel would do. He says, "Mother, go away. I'll take care of this myself. Why can't they come to me directly?" And so what he does is actually, he gets up and he kneels, bows before her, and says, "Bring me a throne that she can sit next to me." And then he says to her, "Mother, I will never refuse you." Now, of course, he does refuse her in this case because Adonijah was trying to overthrow the kingdom and usurp David's position, or Solomon's position. But in either case, what we see here is the establishment of a pattern of the queen roles, or the confirmation of the role of the queen mothers in the kingdom of David. And we see this over and over again in Scripture, that the queen has a very important role in the kingdom. I think in the books of Kings, whenever I think there are 25 kings that were named, and 23 of them are named in association not with their father, but rather with their mother. And in Jeremiah, we also see that the queen mother's role specifically was to be an intercessor for her people and a counselor to the king. And we see this again in the Gospels, the wedding of Cana. In the Gospel of John, chapter 2, the people Mary sees that the people have no wine. And so what does she do? She gets up and advocates to Christ on behalf of the people to get wine. And of course, Jesus doesn't say, "Mother, go away." He says, "Mother, woman, what does this have to do with you and me?" Which is basically an idiom saying, like, you understand where we're going with this, right, and what's going to happen. And so he performs a miracle. And so in the same way, in the kingdom now, what Mary is doing, what she is serving as in the kingdom of Christ, who is in the line of David, is she's serving as the Queen Mother of Heaven, who serves as an intercessor and an advocate for her people. And we see this now as well with people with apparitions, where Mary brings a message. She brings the gospel to places like Guadalupe, Mexico, with Blessed Juan Diego. Or was he canonized fully?
Juan Diego, yeah, I believe
he was.
So.
Okay, Juan Diego, where hundreds of people, tens of thousands of people were baptized over the course of I think 3 years, completely transformed the Mexican culture.
Yeah, and I think here it's important to understand too the great writings of say Saint Louis de Montfort, who gave us the consecration of the Blessed Mother, and just as you were saying that she is to serve the king and all that. Well, who knows best what the king likes and dislikes? Who knows who knows best what the king takes pleasure in and displeasure in? And these are things that we need to really take note of, because even in our family structures, who knows best what father likes and dislikes or takes pleasure and displeasure in. And so when a kid is in trouble, who do they always run to? Usually mom, right? It's to appease the king of the household. They run to the queen mother. And St. Louis de Montfort talks about this, and talks about how, if we're a peasant in the kingdom and we're cloaked in mud and, animal poop and whatever else because we're out working the land, and we want to give a gift to the king, an apple, let's say, what would be better for us? How would we find greater amount of pleasure in the king? If we walk in and present ourselves to the king full of mud and animal poop and whatever else, or if we give the apple to the king because maybe the king isn't a big fan of apples, but she can put it on a gold platter, maybe put a little dish of caramel next to it, things like that, and dress it up in a manner that the king really loves and presents it in our name.
Right. And what's beautiful is we call Mary the seat of wisdom. And I think there's something, too, that we talk about the courtly graces that she has. She is full of grace, is what she is named in the Scriptures. And that itself has its own meaning and is evidence for the Immaculate Conception. But moving on from that, we are peasants in the kingdom, and we do not have the courtly graces to speak the diplomatic language, to know what the king desires for us and for his kingdom as a whole. And so when we offer up our petitions to Our Lady, what she does is she transforms our weak and feeble words, many of which you guys have heard today on this radio program, and she transforms it into something that is more in alignment with God's will, and brings about and seeks to bring about the goodness for.
By the way, I love the self-deprecation of the show. How terrible we are. The feeble words we have to offer.
We have to keep our heads in something.
That's right. I want to read just a quick bit out of one of St. Louis' works, The Secret of Mary and God Alone. Beautiful, beautiful example of Marian devotion. And then I want to make a note about Marian Apparitions as well, because there is doubt about Medjugorje, but there's also wisdom we can take in that too. And so talking about Mary and the great gift that Mary is, St. Louis de Montfort writes this: a sculptor can make a statue or a lifelike model in two ways. One, by using his skill, strength, experience, and good tools to produce a statue out of hard, shapeless matter. Or two, by making a cast of it in a mold. The first way is long and involved and open to all sorts of accidents. The second is quick, easy, straightforward, almost effortless and inexpensive. But the mold must be perfect and true to life, and the material must be easy to handle and offer no resistance. Mary is the great mold of God, fashioned by the Holy Spirit to give human nature to a man who is God by the hypostatic union, and to fashion through grace men who are like to God. No godly features missing from this mold. Everyone who casts himself into it and allows himself to be molded will acquire every feature of Jesus Christ, true God, with little pain or effort, as befits his weak human condition. He will take on a faithful likeness to Jesus with no possibility of distortion, for the devil has never had and never will have any access to Mary, the Holy and Immaculate Virgin. Dear friend, what a difference there is between a soul brought up in the ordinary way to resemble Jesus Christ by people who, like sculptors, rely on their own skill and industry, and a soul thoroughly tractable, entirely detached, most ready to be molded in her by the working of the Holy Spirit.
That's intense. I haven't read a whole lot of Louis de Montfort, and the imagery he uses about a person making a statue out of a block of marble and a chisel and a hammer.
We're not all Michelangelos.
We're not all Michelangelos, or casting in a mold. It's very interesting. It reminds me of 1 Corinthians 1:17, I think, that talks about Christ being the very image of the Father, the ikonios, which the word that is used in Greek there, and talking about Mary being the mold which makes the image. I hadn't thought about that before. And so we have to enter into her embrace, into her womb, like Christ did, and recognize her as our mother, and we too can be shaped in that same image of Christ.
Right.
That is interesting.
And the other reality of her being the mold by which Christ enters the world is proof then also that she had to be immaculate.
Yeah.
She had to be the Immaculate Conception, because if she were not immaculate, there wouldn't be a perfect mold.
Yeah, we can even think about, biblically speaking here too, in the book of Hebrews, it says that in the Ark of the Covenant, there was the manna, Ten Commandments, and the rod of Aaron. And so, if you look back in the Old Testament, you see that the Ark of the Covenant had just meticulous design plans that had to be met. And there was laws. A guy named Uzzah actually even died because he wasn't a Levite. He wasn't supposed to touch it, but he touched it and he died. I mean, this stuff was intense. The Ark of the Covenant was holy. It was sacred. It was set apart. And what we see in the Ten Commandments, what we see in the manna, and what we see in the rod of Aaron is you see the representations of God's Word, His priesthood, and the bread from heaven. But New Testament, what or who contained the real high priest, the Word of God made flesh, and the priesthood.
Yeah.
Not the high priest. So you had the high priest, the Word of God, and
the bread
from heaven.
Yeah.
All literally present within Mary. Now, if it's the case that God gives grace according to mission and calls people apart to holiness according to the mission, how far apart was Mary called from the human race?
Yeah.
Comparatively.
Right.
I mean, I can't think of anything but her being immaculate, because the specifications for the Ark of the Covenant had to be perfect. So Mary must have been too, in terms of her own moral conduct. Yeah. But when it comes to her taking care of God's children in the kingdom as Queen Mother, this kind of stuff continues even to this day.
Right. You know, you mentioned things like Our Lady of Guadalupe, there's Our Lady of Fatima, Our Lady of Lourdes, Our Lady of Knock, Our Lady of Akita, which I've been reading about recently, very interesting.
Our Lady of Good Help.
Our Lady of Good Help.
Over here in Wisconsin.
Yeah. You know, there's all kinds of apparitions that have happened, and coming back now to Medjugorje and the doubt that's surrounding it, the one thing I would like to say is that while the bishops, along with the Pope, have expressed doubt, and in all honesty I have too, for various reasons over the years, we still need to recognize truth and goodness regardless of the manner in which they come. Sure. That's, you know, even a demon, let's say, could express some truth to us.
Oh, and it's going to.
And it's going to, in order to manipulate us. So we need to understand that the truth is good, even if the means by which it comes is not. But that we can find truth and goodness in anything that has existence. And so, you know, an example of this is, even though there's doubt around Medjugorje, the messages that are given are oftentimes very good messages. She says, allegedly, she says, on May 2nd of this year, "Dear children, I am calling you to pray, not to ask for, but to offer sacrifice, sacrificing yourselves. I'm calling you to reveal the truth and merciful love. I am praying to my Son for you, for your faith, which is all the more diminishing in your hearts." Well, that part seems weird to me, but that's, well, whatever.
Here and there.
"I am imploring him to help you with the divine spirit, as I also desire to help you with my motherly spirit. My children, you must be better. Only those who are pure, humble, and filled with love sustain the world. They are saving themselves and the world." And she goes on, and there's another one on April 25th. "Dear children, love, pray, and witness my presence to all those who are far away. By your witness and example, you can draw closer the hearts that are far from God and His grace." Well, these are true things, you know, and we should recognize the truth in them, but that doesn't mean we have to make a pilgrimage to Medjugorje and have all kinds of devotions to her.
Right.
In fact, I would argue we probably shouldn't if the bishops are saying that this is doubtful.
And it is also the case that the Church takes a very, very long time to approve these kind of situations. Even with saints who work miracles on earth here, I think it takes a minimum of 5 years before they can be canonized.
Well, I think it's actually longer than that.
Is it longer?
Yeah, John Paul was put on an expedited course.
Yes, he was. But in either case, the Church takes her time with these things, and I think it's part of, you know, she doesn't want to get egg on her face. she doesn't want to lead the faithful astray even more so.
Right.
And I think even Our Lady of Guadalupe, which by all accounts is miraculous and clearly brought the message of the gospel to the native people of Mexico.
10 million people and converted to the faith in like 40 years or something.
That's incredible, I mean, especially considering the world population at that time.
Yeah.
That took, I think, almost 200 years or more to be approved.
We have to start wrapping up here. A couple things with Marian Apparitions is, one, we're never required to actually have devotion to the apparition. It's a good tool that God is giving us in order to draw closer to Him, but we are not required by any means to have any devotion to any apparitions.
Right, because these are simply private revelation, and that's distinguished from public, not so much that it's open to be seen by many people, but rather what has been declared by the Church as definitive and authoritative for teaching in the Church, and in particular in the Mass. And that was closed with the death of the last apostle, John. That there would be no more public revelation of that sort.
Right. Another thing with the apparitions is it's interesting if you look at the history, and maybe we can do another episode at some point of really diving into something like Our Lady of Medjugorje, or not Medjugorje, Guadalupe. But if you look at, say, the time of Our Lady of Guadalupe, the early 1500s, is the same time when the Protestant revolt was breaking out in Europe. And in Europe, if I remember right, the stat was the Catholic Church lost something like 2 or 3 million souls.
Wow.
Maybe 4 to the Protestants. But in Mexico, the Church gained 10 million initially, and then over the course of the next couple decades, a total of 20 million souls. And so where the Church is maybe losing ground and it seems hopeless, it's actually multiplying in great multitudes in another part of the world.
Right.
And it's similarly happening right now, where in the West we're losing Catholics at a sad and alarming rate in different dioceses. But if you look in places like Africa and India, the Church is growing exponentially. Mm-hmm. And so these things happen in waves. But the apparitions, we have no obligation to believe in them or have devotion to them, just like we have no obligation to pray a rosary. Is it a good idea? Yes, but if we do it, we should follow the apparitions that have been approved of by the Church, so we're not leading ourselves astray.
Yeah, and what you talked about there with the Church springing up at different places in the world, C.S. Lewis in Mere Christianity points out that is exactly what you should expect, because that's exactly what happened with Christ. Second that the Pharisees and the Romans thought that they had gotten rid of this troublemaker, suddenly there's rumors about him coming back to life, and that his followers are out preaching the gospel. There's 5,000 of them suddenly, and they're taking over the town.
Well, and it also follows the gospel, and he says, if you go to a town and bring my peace, and the peace is rejected, then shake the dust from your sandals and move to the next. Yes. So as we reject him in the West, he's going to move on to the next town.
And they need it. They need it too. I mean, we all need it. We all need the gospel. Yeah. And that's why we shouldn't abandon hope here in the West, but we should redouble our efforts and re-examine our methods and techniques, and re-engage the culture with the full force of the Catholic intellectual tradition, with the love of God, of Christ working through our hearts.
Which is exactly what we're trying to do on the Lost Voice radio program, is to re-engage the culture and recover and renew the lost voice of philosophy and theology, and the great gift that is to the Church, and the great gift that the Church is to all of us. And so here we wrap up yet another, I would say, successful Tuesday radio show. John just gave me a nasty look. Maybe not so successful. Either way, send us your questions, comments, love, doubt, whatever it is. lostvoice@wcatradio.com. Signing off today, this is Jacob Nelson along with John Studi for the Lost Voice radio program. Have a blessed Tuesday.
We hope you enjoyed the program and will join us back for another show on WCAT Radio. This is Sebastian Mahfood. Good day.